Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're tackling something absolutely huge. We are going way beyond your standard everyday curriculum debates here. We're actually exploring a civilization-level question, and that is the future of learning and human development. Now, if you've been paying any attention to the skyrocketing rates of chronic absenteeism, anxiety, and just general apathy in classrooms lately, you probably already know that the academic problem isn't actually the root problem. The real issue, it's a profound crisis of design. So today, we're going to break down exactly how we can move beyond these outdated industrial models and start designing educational spaces for genuine human flourishing. So let's just dive right in. What is school actually for in an age of infinite information? I mean, seriously, think about it for a second. When facts and data are literally everywhere, right in our pockets, why on earth do we still structure schools around standardized information retrieval? Because of this huge mismatch, kids today are feeling a profound disconnect. They're sitting there quietly asking themselves, why am I learning this? Will I even matter? Is AI just going to replace me anyway? And when learning completely loses its meaning, motivation just collapses. Our kids are feeling totally disconnected from meaning, from a sense of belonging, from competence, and honestly, most dangerously of all, they're disconnected from hope. Now, to really wrap our heads around why this is happening all at once, the sources use this brilliant mythological metaphor, the typhon. In ancient Greek myth, the typhon was this ultimate chaos monster, a terrifying, many-headed force that just caused absolute fear, confusion, and paralysis. Well, today's educational typhon is absolutely a multi-headed threat. Think about it. You've got algorithmic distraction constantly pulling at kids' attention, combined with this industrial style of schooling that literally confuses compliance for actual learning. Then you add in performative accountability, deep loneliness, learned helplessness, and hyperstandardization. And now we're throwing AI-driven passivity right into the mix. Just like those ancient cities paralyzed by the typhon, our modern schools are completely freezing up because their old tools just don't work against these new overlapping threats. And this sets up an incredibly stark contrast. On one side, look at what our schools unintentionally became: test prep factories, behavioral compliance systems, basically just data pipelines. We're totally over-scripting childhood. We're constantly correcting, evaluating, and comparing kids, which frankly just breeds dependency. But on the flip side, consider what children are actually biologically wired for. They are wired for belonging. They're built for storytelling, for mentorship, movement, art, and collaborative discovery. The absolute root crisis here is a profound loss of meaning and agency. Maria Montessori actually saw this over a century ago. She realized that when adults over-control a child's environment, that child becomes psychologically diminished. A kid who feels unseen, who isn't given any real agency, they simply cannot fully learn.
Which brings us to Section 1, the educational brand wars. So for decades, schools have tried to fight off this educational chaos by basically clinging to rigid brand identities. They'd plant their flags in the ground and declare, we are pure classical, or we are strictly constructivist. But these historical traditions, they didn't just emerge out of thin air. Actually, each one successfully solved a very real, very specific human problem. Let's break this down a bit. Take Montessori, for example. It completely solved the need for independence. And how do kids become independent thinkers? Well, through hands-on learning, intrinsic motivation, and a carefully prepared environment. Next up, look at Reggio Emilia. This tradition beautifully solved the need for wonder and creativity. They use the atelier, or art studio, which proves that intelligence doesn't just show up on worksheets. It comes through what they call the 100 languages of children. Finally, there's Waldorf. Waldorf solved the need to preserve imagination, soul, and rhythm by heavily utilizing storytelling, nature, and community cohesion. Look, each of these is a brilliant tool, but the reality is, not a single one of them holds the entire truth all on its own.
And that leads us to this incredibly powerful realization from the sources. Children do not care about educational branding wars. They care whether school feels alive. Seriously, a school that claims to be a specific brand but then actively suppresses a kid's curiosity or autonomy, that school is just protecting its own identity. It's not actually serving its learners. The ultimate solution here isn't about picking a side like it's a team sport. It's about harmonizing these best practices so the environment actually feels alive and responsive to the human beings inside it. Moving on to Section 2, the ultimate school synthesis. So the crucial point we need to take away is this. We literally have to stop assuming that the exact same method is going to work for every single child. The future of education doesn't belong to rigid traditionalism, and honestly, it doesn't belong to pure technological acceleration either.
Instead, the future belongs to adaptive, human-centered learning ecosystems. Take the SYV Family School as a prime example of this. They explicitly pull from the best practices of multiple schools of thought. They'll blend the nurturing, art-immersed environment of a Waldorf school with early literacy and varied teaching methods. They aren't worried about staying pure to one single doctrine. And this isn't just about throwing a bunch of random ideas into a blender to make a catchy slogan either. It's about intentionally overlapping these philosophies to serve the whole child.
Which leads us right to the core practical takeaway for any parents or educators joining us today. If you are looking for a model to study, the strongest examples are schools that keep child-centered, hands-on work, preserve a calm, beautiful environment, use art and nature as core tools, and allow more flexibility than either tradition alone. They adapt to the kid, rather than forcing the kid to adapt to the brand.
When you actually take a step back and combine these elements, you get what the sources refer to as a MECE architecture. Sounds a bit corporate, I know, but MECE just stands for mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. Basically, it means every single part does a distinct job, and when you put them together, they cover absolutely everything a developing child needs. Let's walk through it. Step 1 is agency. This is driven by that Montessori-style choice and a prepared environment. Step 2 is meaning-making, utilizing Reggio-style inquiry and visual thinking. Step 3 is belonging, where you build trust and community through Waldorf-style rhythm and daily rituals. And finally, step 4 is future-readiness, prioritizing deep problem-solving and social-emotional learning. Notice how this structure avoids overlap? Agency isn't meaning-making, right? And belonging definitely isn't future readiness. But working together, they create a completely holistic, unified ecosystem.
And that fourth step, the future readiness part, well, that brings us right to the AI pivot, because we absolutely have to talk about artificial intelligence here. Look, if we continue to teach kids to act like robots, if we just prioritize rote memorization, quiet compliance, and narrow test performance, well, actual robots are going to economically replace them. Simple as that. AI is already fantastic at standard information retrieval and low-level procedural tasks. But look at the human advantage. AI struggles profoundly with wisdom, with ethics, with collaborative trust and moral courage. The future human advantage is not about knowing facts. Not anymore. It is entirely about being deeply, creatively, and relationally human. We've got to start teaching kids to use AI as a partner, to amplify their own imagination, definitely not as a replacement for their own critical thinking. So, look, we just have to drop the tribalism. As the sources remind us, no single system owns the truth. Children are way too complex for educational tribalism. When a shockingly high number of students today honestly no longer believe that adulthood will be better than childhood, their motivation just dies. Hope itself is an educational technology. Without hope, a child's cognition literally narrows. So the opposite of the typhon, that massive chaos monster we talked about earlier, isn't tighter control, and it's certainly not more standardized testing. The antidote is the deliberate design of communities built for genuine human flourishing. So here is the ultimate question to leave you with today. How will you help build a learning community where children feel capable, needed, and hopeful again? Whether you're a parent, a teacher, a school administrator, or just someone who really cares about the future, you have a role in breaking down these industrial walls. We desperately need environments where kids aren't just surviving a factory floor, but are truly flourishing as capable human beings. So take these harmonized concepts, start looking for these traits in your local schools, and begin demanding educational spaces that actually feel alive. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking the big questions.